Alright guys, so in this video, I'm going to be discussing the forgotten grand staircase in Titanic. Yes, there was another, albeit a lot smaller, grand staircase on the ship. It was called the aft grand staircase, and it was located farther back into the ship, closer to the stern, in between the third and fourth funnels to be exact. And by the way, just for accuracy's sake, if you see any old photos of the aft grand staircase, they are from the Olympic. Exact same thing with the main grand staircase. Any black and white photo that looks like a grand staircase is from the Olympic. Unfortunately, there are no grand staircase photos of the Titanic, mainly because the Olympic was before the Titanic and the grand staircases were virtually identical. It did have the exact same sky dome as the original grand staircase. It was located forward of the first class smoke room and was for first class only, obviously. Although it would be interesting, could you imagine if they built two different grand staircases, with the first one being for the first class and the second one being for the second class? But no, this was also for the first class, and this was not featured on the James Cameron 1997 film at all. There's really no reason to put the aft grand staircase in, considering it would probably just confuse people based on how small it is. It is just two staircases, unlike the main grand staircase that was a lot bigger. Now, when it comes to what happened to the aft grand staircase, it was likely severely damaged when the ship split. The split happened like directly in front of the aft grand staircase. Although theoretically, you could, think that maybe the dome would still be intact as the ship started plunging to the ocean. Of course, with the stern imploding, it would have been completely destroyed. However, there are some fragments that were found on the ocean floor, kind of the exterior of the dome, with much of the glass already destroyed, but you can kind of see the exterior little paneling, like the metal of the dome where the glass used to be housed. I always get a kick out of looking at that photo because normally with the main grand staircase, you look down directly from the top. You'll be able to see all the way to the bottom, and it's kind of like the idea of there flooding happening at the bottom, looking in from the top. Crazy image, but because the aft grand staircase was so small, you look directly down and it's just the floor. It is kind of interesting that that was identified as the aft grand staircase's dome and not the main grand staircase's dome. Now, the main grand staircase is in much better condition, considering the aft grand staircase just doesn't exist. It was part of where kind of the ship ripped, and based on its position as the ship plunged to the ocean floor, it would have been one of the first areas that would have just gotten ripped out completely during the implosion, as opposed to the more forward grand staircase. Obviously the staircase itself, because it's wood, likely gets ripped out and floats up. That's why it's a giant hole, but you can still see directly into where the grand staircase was. The main grand staircase, with the aft grand staircase just completely destroyed. There's no exploring it because there's nothing left of it. Now, one of the main reasons for the second grand staircase was just access. They needed another staircase towards the back of the ship, and for first class, obviously, if you're going to make a staircase, it has to be grandiose. That is just kind of the reason there was a second grand staircase that did only have two sets of stairs on the Titanic. I've always pictured the aft grand staircase because it never gets talked about. You never see it in the movie during the flooding. They only focus on the main grand staircase and the flooding that ensued as the water came up. But imagine the aft grand staircase still together with no water in it as the ship rose out of the ocean. It's just kind of interesting to think about how there was technically a grand staircase that was fully together, as the main one was getting flooded. The secondary, smaller one that not a lot of people remember was perfectly fine for at least a little bit. And then, of course, when the ship splits, it splits almost right directly in front of it. And then the aft grand staircase, unfortunately, gets totally destroyed on the way to the bottom of the ocean. The aft grand staircase, in terms of its interior design, very similar to the original grand staircase. It did have a clock, and it also did have a dome. However, the lighting was a little bit darker, just like the main one, in terms of the actual light shining into it. When you watch the 1997 film, it's almost like a completely translucent, like it gives off natural light, especially with the scenes at night during the sinking when they're gathered around inside the grand staircase. You look up at the dome and it's like it's a sunny, bright blue day out. That's really not how the grand staircase was. It was a little bit darker than that. Originally, everyone thought it looked like that, but later on, after 1997, it was discovered that the grand staircase, the lighting on the interior was a little bit darker in terms of it shining down. There still were lights that shine down the glass dome surrounding it, which made it look brighter, but it wasn't necessarily that bright per se. And then this is just to further put into context the staircase situation on board the Titanic. You can see the forward grand staircase. That would be the main grand staircase we all know from the movie. The upper deck being the boat deck, the lower deck going all the way down to F deck. You do have the aft grand staircase, which was a lot smaller, going from A deck to C deck. And then you do have two second class staircases, not grand staircases. Second class had some decent staircases. Their main one was located towards the stern of the ship. And then the second class also had an elevator, which was very rare for the time. And then third class, they just had two different stairs, as well as multiple other stairs. You can see third class men's forward stairs, third class men's aft stairs. There were a lot more third class cabins on the way lower interior of the ship. That's why they needed more staircases. But I just think that's kind of a visual thing to look at when comparing all the different staircases on board the ship. When it comes to the flood time of the aft grand staircase, there really was no flood time. When the ship went under, that's when it flooded, kind of like the entire stern section that broke off. None of that had any water within it. That's why it imploded. It was just one giant air bubble, and it went down, and you had all these areas of trapped air, and the explosion ends up happening after that. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Just a fun little Easter egg on the second grand staircase on Titanic, although you can't really consider it a grand staircase considering it's only two sets of stairs on two levels. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.